Video games made their way into American homes as early as the 1970s, but it wasn't until the console wars in the 1990s that in-home video game consoles became nearly ubiquitous. Nintendo, Sega, Sony, and Microsoft were all pumping out quality machines that played increasingly awe-inspiring games, and that trend has continued ever since. As Nintendo prepares to kick off the next generation of console releases with the imminent arrival of the Switch 2, the Great Pop Culture Debate wanted to look back at the slickest systems from the past and name the best video game console. Playing the NES taught me that if you want hardware to work properly, you just need to blow on it. As an adult, that strategy still checks out. I'm your host, Eric Resniak. Please welcome my panelists for this episode. The drift in her Joy-Cons brings her only despair. It's Andrea Guerrero.
I also hate it when sticks bend to the left.
Well, thankfully, they now make a pill for that, Andrea, so we're all good. Next, will circle get the square, or will X or triangle mark the spot? It's the official Great Pop Culture Debate debut of panelist David Silbert. Welcome, David.
It's good to be here.
We're so looking forward to playing with you. And finally, here's Jim Zadzik still trying to defeat the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles video game from 1989.
I actually did it last month, but I had all the Game Genie codes on, but it counts, right?
It absolutely does. Electric Seaweed. You know I love it. Up in the producer booth, we have Bob Erlenbach, who is reflecting on the ups and downs of his life. If you're curious about how we ended up with this Sweet 16, become a Patreon supporter of the podcast or listen to the 3-minute preview available wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can head to this episode on greatpopculturedebate.com to find the listener bracket, as well as videos from the 16 nominated consoles so you can play along with us at home. While you're there, check out some of our other related episodes, including Best Nintendo Villain, Best Final Fantasy Game, and Best Super Smash Bros. Fighter. And with that out of the way, flip the RF switch and let's fire up these debates. First up, the panel voted unanimously to keep snapping with 1-seed Nintendo Switch, which meant that it once again made 4-seed Nintendo 3DS obsolete, this time in our bracket. Anyone want to speak on the 3DS before we shut it down for good? I know I didn't ask this, but it was a novel system that came out during the 3D craze. I will confess that I literally almost never played it with the 3D slider on. Andrea, I see you nodding your head no.
I loved it.
Did you?
Yeah, I know that's kind of odd. I know with VR and stuff, it's kind of like a motion sickness, but I think it was interesting because it didn't require glasses. It just was built into the system, some kind of fancy magic that I still don't understand. But I had a great time playing Mario, 3D Land, and some other classics on that, at least from my point of view.
And there were great games on that system, absolutely. So, wonderful system, but it was up against the Switch, and what are you going to do? Next, the panel is evenly split between our first console war. It's 2-seed Nintendo GameCube and 3-seed Sony PlayStation 4. Andrea, tell us why it's hip to be square with the GameCube. Jim, tell us why, with PS4, play really had no limits. Andrea, please go first.
Yeah, so the GameCube was officially released in 2001, and this console, along with the Sega Dreamcast, which I gave a shout out to earlier, it really felt like it was ushering in a new era of consoles to millennials. It was shaped unlike any other console. It was an actual cube, and so it kind of feels more like an artifact and a symbol of the time. And lest we forget the controversial controller that comes with it. The general hand feel of this controller is one of my favorites. It introduced the second joystick for Nintendo consoles, and I also really always loved the clickety-clack buttons for the bumpers. It kind of gave it this more analog, immersive experience. The GameCube also premiered some of today's cult favorites like Star Fox Adventures, Pikmin, and Super Mario Sunshine, which is one of my favorite Super Mario games. We saw the continuation of Zelda with Wind Waker, and we can't talk about the GameCube without talking about Super Smash Bros. Melee, which would go on to become the GameCube's best-selling game, and it shelled out over 7 million copies.
Yeah, great. Jim, talk to us about the PS4.
It definitely has more advanced graphics if we're comparing the two against each other with different time periods, right? Iconic games, Last of Us Part 2, the God of War, and the Spider-Man game, which I got to be honest, I maybe voted for this specifically for that Spider-Man game because I've never actually played a PS4 except for at the Strong National Museum of Play, and it has that Spider-Man game there, and It's a lot of fun. And the graphics are really impressive, and I think that's what it was. So just a little experience for me, and I wanted to give it some credit because it was definitely it's really impressive of the quality and the aspects of it. It's it has a lot of value to what you're getting, as well as looking really nice and neat. I mean, you did leave out the GameCube does have a handle.
Yeah.
And the mini discs,
Yeah.
While the PS4, will definitely play other media alongside of being a great console.
It was a Blu-ray player too, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was. David, where are you on this one? Is it GameCube or is it the PS4?
So I had originally said in my voting the PS4, but the more I'm thinking about it, I have to give the nod to the GameCube. I think just because of how novel it was at the time period.
I love the GameCube controller. It's actually my favorite controller of any system. I think the PS controllers have a better fit into your hands, but in terms of the ability to play games with that GameCube controller, it is filled. They have crammed that gram playing Donkey Konga, which bring back Donkey Konga, you cowards, on the GameCube controller was a delight. I would much rather do that than the bongos. I'm also going to vote for GameCube here. That's 3 for GameCube, and it will continue into the next round. Next, it's Nintendo on Nintendo Violence, as 1-seed Nintendo Wii currently has the edge 3-1, but David prefers its handheld cousin, the Nintendo DS, a 4-seed. I will see if I've got the moves and the motion to put forward the Wii. David, please give us a stylus report as you stump for DS. David, please go first.
The Nintendo DS was released in 2004, and my first point right out the bat, when I look at kind of the merits of a console, I look at kind of commercial success, how well did it sell, kind of critical success, what were the games, how good were the games, and then kind of the novel factor that I mentioned with the GameCube. So there's no question that the Wii and the DS both bring that novel piece to it. It's Nintendo we're talking about. The motion controls on the Wii, but the DS with the stylus, the dual screen, that brought a degree to the gameplay. It brought both a degree of complexity to the gameplay while also seemingly or somehow being accessible to all. So, but long before the Wii made video games accessible to grandma and grandpa, I would make the argument that the DS did, if we remember Brain Age, if that rings a bell. Totally. That was a big franchise at the time. The first 2 games in that series, which were on the DS, combined for, I believe, 33 million in sales alone, which was a huge franchise. I never played it, but it was huge. And that wasn't an outlier. The DS sold 154 million units compared to the Wii's 101.6. And also gave birth to a lot of great all-time franchises. Maybe not the same breadth of games as we saw on the Wii. I mean, the Wii had some stellar software, but the story is it all began on the DS, made it accessible to a wide audience while still kind of maintaining that core gamer crowd. And that's why it's an all-time great in my book.
It 100% is. Great argument. Andrea, has he swayed you, or are you going to stick with the Wii here?
I'm sticking with the Wii.
Jim, did he sway you, or are you sticking with the Wii?
No, but you make a really good point of certain things starting with the DS and then they were expanded on in the Wii.
To me, this should not be a round 1 matchup. Both of these should be in the Elite 8. They're both really incredible systems. They both were tremendously successful, very innovative. With that being said, we are going to move Nintendo Wii into round 2, but great job, David. I also noticed that the Nintendo DS, David Silbert, is there a it's your
There might be a little bias there. I'm not going to lie.
Yep.
Little something there.
Yep. Next, in a similar matchup between earlier consoles, the panel is currently leaning toward 2-seed Nintendo Entertainment System, or just NES if you're nasty, but Andrea wants to travel with 3-seed Game Boy. David, hold reset as you turn off the system to make sure that NES's progress is saved to round 2. Andrea, tell us why you want to keep playing with portable power and the Game Boy. Andrea, please go first.
Yeah, so the Game Boy was released in 1989, and it stayed relevant in the eyes of pop culture until the early 2000s easily. The gray and purple color scheme with that pop of Nintendo Dark Red, the simple D-pad and 2 buttons, it can be found on nostalgia memorabilia even today. The console itself was designed with portability in mind. It was competing with the Sega Game Gear and the Atari Lynx, but it was probably about half the size of either of those consoles, and it made itself small enough to carry around, and you still got this solid gaming experience. It was a tiny machine with a beautiful display of video game ingenuity that was simplified. And I truly believe once the Game Boy was designed, Nintendo settled into its reputation of building capital G good consoles. And that's what they've excelled at ever since. It's so good, in fact, that combined with the Game Boy Color, which we talked about a little bit, it's still the 4th best-selling video console of all time. It's outselling the original PlayStation and the PS4 and its own family member, the original Wii. And lastly, in 2009, it was inducted into the National Toy Hall of Fame, making it only one of 2 consoles to be inducted, the other one being the Atari 2600.
Which we have not talked about, which is criminal, but I will say it didn't make it to the bracket, but we do appreciate Atari, and we will never forgive E.T. for killing it. David, I will give you a second to do your counter-argument, but that is the second time that we have referenced the Strong National Museum of Play, which is home to the National Toy Hall of Fame. And if you do not know this, it is based in Rochester, New York. It is an incredible institution, and if you enjoy video games, I encourage you to go. They just opened up an entirely new wing in 2024.
It's so cool.
It's so cool. It's great.
It's
if you
so
love
cool.
video games, you will love it. Hit me up on social media. I used to live in Rochester. We'll give you the deets. David Silbert, talk to us about the NES.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strong argument for the Game Boy, and that was my very, very first console growing up, and I have very fond memories of it. And ironically, I didn't have an NES growing up, but I will debate for it nonetheless because how can you not debate in favor of the Nintendo Entertainment System? So this was released in 1983 overseas, as well as known famously as the Famicom, but obviously when it came to the West, became known as the NES, and that became legendary in the eyes of gamers ever since. It's the console that started it all for Nintendo. Obviously, they were in the arcade space, and if you played Mario Brothers or Donkey Kong at the arcade, that obviously predates this. But it was the first piece of console hardware where many of these franchises made their grand debut in front of your television screen. So Mario is the obvious, Super Mario Brothers is the obvious example here. But a lot of series started point blank on NES. No prior history, and just going to list a few of these, and you'll notice there's a running theme here, but we've got Zelda, we've got Metroid, we've got Castlevania, Mega Man, Final Fantasy, Ninja Gaiden, Fire Emblem, Dragon Quest, Earthbound. If we're going to go a little niche, Megami Tensei series. The point is, we've had a lot of really excellent games that have series that have stood the test of time that began on that piece of hardware. It's the best-selling Nintendo console that's not a handheld, that is also not named the Switch or the Wii. So that's obviously a big caveat, but we also have to keep in mind gaming has been getting bigger and bigger over the decades. So the NES is one of the all-time greats.
Yeah, and if it moves into round 2, I'll give some context as to why that was a big deal in the 80s specifically. But Jim, where are you on this one? Is it going to be Game Boy or NES?
It's definitely NES. But yeah, it's still, the NES is just so... It's the beginning. Like you said, they're going to say more things about it. I think if it moves on, there's many more things to say about it.
Yeah, I'll say this, Andrea. I was a huge Game Boy fan. I bought my first Game Boy in 1989 with my own money, which is a very big deal for like a 10-year-old. I played the shit out of that game and that system. It was an incredible system, but the NES is the NES. And is it pepperoniing? Maybe. But I think this pepperoni is delicious, and that's why it's going to continue into round 2. Next 2 PlayStations enter. Only one will leave, as the majority of the panel is squarely in the circle for 1-seed PlayStation 2. But Andrea prefers the original 4-seed PlayStation Uno. Jim, tell us why 2 is better than 1. Andrea, tell us why you want to live in our world, but play in Sony's. Andrea, please go first.
I don't think I'm going to sway anyone with this one. So I will just say that the PlayStation gave us a lot of really good franchises. So we got Metal Gear Solid, we got Crash Bandicoot, we got Final Fantasy VII, and most importantly, we got Lara Croft's pointy boobs in Tomb Raider. So I don't know what else more you need, really, to put PlayStation forward.
I mean, I'm sitting here with my pointy breasts, so I respect the game. But Jim, has she swayed you, or are you sticking with PS2 here?
Oh, no, PS2. Grand Theft Auto, you forgot there, but that's in PS2. Yeah, I mean, it could also play DVDs, so it was entering that media player aspect as well. It could also play almost all the original PlayStation games. So it was really a really impressive upgrade, I think, in terms of what it could do, the amount of titles, largest libraries in gaming history.
Yeah. David, do you agree with that? Are you sticking with PS2 here?
Yeah, and Jim, I'm sorry if you already said it, but the PS2, I believe, played PS1 games, and obviously that's a cheap shot, but it was just more except better, and
It's really just a vote for both of them if you pick the two.
Yeah, it's true. It's basically voting for both. With that being said, we will move PlayStation 2 into round 2. Back to Nintendo, it's a battle of system sequels, as 2-seed Super Nintendo currently has the votes over 3-seed Game Boy Advance. Andrea, do what you can to push Advance forward. I will give at least 16 distinct reasons why the Super Nintendo should win here. Andrea, please go first. I'm so sorry you're on the outs on most of these round 1 conversations.
No, and it's funny because just like a side tangent, I've noticed that the 3-1s where I'm the one are all handhelds. And there was a really interesting statistics that I saw with the Game Boy, just going back to that for a second. Nintendo of America showed that 46% of Game Boy players were female compared to the percentage of female players for both NES, 29%, and SNES, 14%.
Wow.
So I thought that was really interesting that the handhelds ended up being more favored by females.
That's so cool.
So again, this is one I know I'm not going to sway anyone on. The Game Boy Advance introduced me to Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, which ultimately made me the person that I am today. So
that's great. I mean, I will say this. I actually think I skipped the Game Boy Advance. When did it come out? Do you know the year that it came out?
June 2001.
2001. So at that point, I had finished college and I was starting my career and I was absolutely dead broke. Jim, are you sticking with Super Nintendo here?
I was in the same category as you, and I think I'm still sticking.
David, A, did you own a Game Boy Advance?
I did.
And B, are you sticking with Super Nintendo?
Super Nintendo gave us Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. That's it for me.
That's the argument. I do think, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but there was a cool thing where you could use the Game Boy Advance as a controller with the GameCube, correct?
Yeah, it was one of the first kind of accessory pieces that Nintendo incorporated with its other consoles. You could use it as a controller. I think you could transfer save data to other games across the two consoles too. I think it's really when Nintendo started to embrace that sort of backwards compatibility and preparing for backwards compatibility for the future.
Yeah. Again, these are all great systems, and it's a bummer that we're eliminating because I think Advance is great, even though I didn't own one. But it's up against Super Nintendo, which to me was a pretty big deal at the time. Next, another unanimous victory by our panelists, which thought 1-seed Nintendo 64 had the magic number, meaning that the sole Xbox entry on our list, 4-seed Xbox 360, spun out of the bracket. Did anyone want to say anything on Xbox 360? I did not own one. I've never owned an Xbox. David, did you own a 360?
Yes, I did. And I know I said a little bit about the Xbox in the warm-up, so I have to give it up for... Probably not really arguably. It was Microsoft's best-selling console, the 360. Really the only one that really made kind of a serious effort in the console race. Not that that's really important, but it gave us long-awaited entries in the Halo franchise. It gave us it began the Gears of War series. It gave us more Fable. It gave us Forza. It gave us some of the quintessential Microsoft games, and also kind of pioneered the kind of third-person shooter genre as a whole. It also had Xbox Live, which was kind of the main foray into live service games, for better or worse. And Microsoft, at least in my opinion, still does it the best to this day in terms of the sheer live service aspects. So I had a lot of fun in high school playing with my friends, getting on Xbox Live, playing games, even if I no longer have... They're not there anymore. They're all logged off on my Series X, so I'm very sad playing my single-player games nowadays.
Oh, but I mean, when you talk about multiplayer games and not talk about GoldenEye on the N64, I submit that you cannot. So we will talk about the N64 in round 2. Finally, in round 1, the bulk of the panel thinks it's only the beginning for 3-seed Sega Genesis, while David thinks 3 is the magic number for 2-seed PlayStation 3. Jim, explain to us why Genesis was a godsend to 90s gamers. David, I have run out of PlayStation puns, but please go ahead and defend the PS3.
I guess I'm up first. I think I might be cooked. I know that this is an uphill battle, but I'm going to do my best. I didn't vote for the PS4 earlier, but I really feel strongly about the PlayStation 3, which came out in 2006. Again, competing against the Xbox 360, competing against the Nintendo Wii. And the PS3, one of the top-selling systems with 87.4 million units sold. That puts it pretty squarely within the top 10. It was known as it was a notorious difficult console for studios to develop for. So the infamous cell processor, it was like a pain in the ass for for developers to build worthwhile games. But the funny thing is, the games that came out were of arguably the highest quality that we'd seen at the time. So I had trouble just thinking of all the big franchises that either started or were continued on PlayStation 3, but just a sampling are the first 3 games in the Uncharted trilogy. We had The Last of Us. We had Metal Gear Solid 4, which was like capping off a massive franchise. We had all 3 Little Big Planet games, which was hotly anticipated at the time. We had God of War 3, Heavy Rain. We had Killzone games, Infamous, Resistance, Ratchet and Clank, The Last Guardian, Demon Souls. I ran out of space on the page, Stephen. Take those notes. But it obviously is not the most accessible console on the market compared to handhelds or the Wii, but it destroyed the 360 and the Wii just in terms of sales and, I would argue, critical reception. It just brought the quality and the quantity to the games, first and foremost.
Great argument here. Jim, did he sway you, or are you going to stick with the Sega Genesis?
No, I'm going to stick with the Sega Genesis. I do remember the PS3 was fairly expensive too, right? What was it?
I glossed over that detail. Did it retail $5.99 US dollars?
Yeah.
That's a valid point.
Yeah, I thought of Sega as the Genesis as like it just. I think in some ways it's branding, as it was trying to differentiate from the NES in terms of being just like extreme and like the Sega part of it, right? The Sonic the Hedgehog, the Streets of Rage, the Golden Axe. Altered Beast was a favorite of mine. The idea that it was at least pitching itself as, fast, some of the games much more fast in speed, and maybe that it had a little more power. That definitely made it, more a competitor with the NES that we've already kind of talked about. And then, more affordable as well if we're comparing against the PS3. But definitely they kind of punched with like a kind of an attitude that wasn't necessarily what Nintendo was doing. So I think that's something that's recognizable for them.
The marketing was a huge aspect of this, and this was the early 90s. So you had the really extreme marketing campaigns, and it was Super Nintendo versus Genesis. And I think Genesis 8 Nintendo's launched there. Andrea, are you sticking with Sega Genesis, or are you thinking about PS3?
I'm going to stick with the Sega Genesis. That was like, the Genesis was my childhood console, like what I grew up on. And I never owned a PS3, so just bias aside, sticking with the Genesis.
All right, I will stick with the Genesis too, mostly because at that point in the market, Nintendo had the market. It was Nintendo's market, and Sega came out of basically nowhere and kicked them in the nuts, right? And I give them props. And if we didn't have a Sega, would we have seen the type of innovation that we got so quickly in the whole industry? It really was needed to have a spoiler like that, which means we will be moving to Sega Genesis into round 2, and that's the end of round 1. We're going to take a quick break to attempt to play something on the Nintendo Virtual Boy. We'll be right back.
Want even more great pop culture debate in your life? We're talking behind-the-scenes shenanigans, hot takes fresh off the press, and all the pop culture goodness you can handle? Then you absolutely must follow us on social media. Get your daily dose of debates, polls, and hilarious commentary on all the latest trends. We're on Instagram and TikTok at Great Pop Culture Debate, and we've joined the Blue Sky Revolution at gpcd.bsky.social for even more in-depth discussions. So, whether you're team hashtag pineapple on pizza or team hashtag Die Hard is a Christmas movie, join the conversation. Follow the Great Pop Culture Debate on Instagram and Blue Sky and TikTok and all our other socials too, because the debate never sleeps.
And we are back for round 2 of our best video game console debate. Before we get into the Elite 8, I'd like my panelists to share their social media and what else they're working on. I'm going to start with you again, Jim. Where can people find you? With the understanding that we're in a very weird time in social media and things might not be there by the time we share this. And what else are you working on?
Last time we recorded an episode, I was talking about how I wanted to move on to a new social media platform, and I finally have. I'm on Blue Sky. So I'm at jczad.bluesky.social. I'm also on the Patreon every once in a while when we have something fun to watch together. Let's doing this stuff. I don't know. I'm thinking about some creative things to do. I don't know.
That's great.
That's
what was your first video game system that you can remember?
So I know in the warm up I had said the Commodore 64 because that's true. That I spent tons of time on that, but definitely my an Atari was like the one that I think my grandparents had, and at their house. So that was the first one we really ever played with.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, well, welcome back, and we're glad to get some Atari love in there. David, welcome to the podcast. Where can people find you? What else are you working on, and what's your first system?
Yeah, so likewise, I'm kind of dodging social media. So you can find me over on my own personal website. I run a gaming website. It's called The Punished Backlog, punishedbacklog.com. You can also find me sometimes hosting episodes of our own podcast, The Punished Podcast. So you can see the branding is kind of all punished stuff. It's a long story. Yes,
Yeah.
But
Are you my father? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. That's where you can find me mainly. I also write for Business Insider on occasion. I cover food. Money.com. Epic Games news feed. You might find me from time to time. So I try to stay busy. But
Awesome.
and my first video game console was a handheld. It was the Game Boy. And I have strong, fond memories playing Pokemon for the very first time on that blessed purple beauty.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Andrea, where can people find you? What are you working on, and what's your first console?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. I do allegedly have a Blue Sky account that I've opened like 3 times. Both of them are at Dre Souffle. I have an Etsy store, Dre Souffle Designs, where you can get stickers and decals from me. Trying to work on more artwork just to, not think about anything else that's going on in the world. So hopefully I'll be able to get some of that stuff up on Etsy as well. My first console that I have really fond memories of was the Sega Genesis, which we'll talk about more in this next round. But fuck the Lion King game.
Fuck the Lion King game. Be prepared, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Andrea. The best place to follow us is on Blue Sky at gpcd.bsky.social or at gpcd on Mastodon. You should also make sure to subscribe to our page on YouTube, where we'll be posting more original video game content. But what you really need to do is sign up for our weekly newsletter, new every Tuesday at noon. It tells you about everything new in pop culture that week. Sign up by finding the link on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com or via our link tree on any of our social media accounts. My first console was the ColecoVision. As producer Bob reminded me during the break, Coleco not only produced Cabbage Patch in the 1980s, which is true, but it also had a video game system that predated the Nintendo and had its own Atari adapter, so we had all those games. Now, with that being said, let's move into round 2, which will now be in 16 bits instead of 8. Looks like the panel has another unanimous decision for 1-seed Nintendo Switch, which meant that 2-seed GameCube was carried out by its built-in handle. We've not really talked about the Switch at all yet, and I do think we need to address it. We say this, and we are on the very eve of the reveal of the Switch 2, but Jim, do you have a Switch?
Yes.
And Andrea, you have a Switch. I know this for sure.
Yes.
David, do you have a Switch?
Absolutely.
And we won't go too deep into it because, again, it's moving on. But the huge kind of advancement here was it took Nintendo was having all the success with its handhelds for the previous couple generations, and its at-home consoles were we'll say not doing so well. Wii U, looking at you, and it brought two great tastes together and created something that really you don't need to have two distinct consoles anymore. You have one, and it can do pretty much everything really well, aside from the Joy-Con drift issue, which is to this day a huge frustration for me. But it was a novel adaptation for gaming, and it has been unbelievably successful from a sales perspective. Anybody wanted to add on anything before we move it along, or we'll just talk about it more in the Final Four? We're good. We'll move it on to the Final Four. Next, more Nintendo battles, with 1-seed Nintendo Wii currently having the edge over Big Daddy NES, a 2-seed. Andrea, get on the balance board and give us a fit check on the Wii. I will input the Konami code to get extra lives for the NES. I'll go first. So the NES has the primacy argument here. It was by no means the first home gaming console. Numerous systems from the 70s and early 80s predated it, including Atari, Activision, etc. But the early 80s video game crash completely killed those systems and also seriously scared retailers. The NES had to be amazing to turn around an absolutely hostile market. And it was. From a sales perspective, the NES was a smash hit for the time. It sold more than 62 million units, more than any other Nintendo home console successor up until the Wii, which came out nearly 20 years later. It sold more than 500 million games, which to this day is the fifth most games of any Nintendo system, including the handhelds. It's also important to understand the economics around this system. In 1985, when this system was released, it cost $199 for the base package, which included the Zapper Gun and the Super Mario / Duck Hunt game. In 2024 dollars, that would be $576. Can you imagine paying that much for a gaming console, especially at a time when it was essentially an unproven medium? That is wild. We also talked about the games, the history, the franchises that it launched. But the other thing that NES did brilliantly was it created a culture around gaming. Nintendo Power, the Game Help Hotline, cartoons for some of its biggest properties, breakfast cereal tie-ins. The Fred Savage movie The Wizard was literally all about the Nintendo championships. Like, it wasn't just a video game console, it was an identity for people. To me, it's not just the primacy argument, it also was an incredibly successful machine. But speaking of successful machines, Andrea, the Wii.
Is this one 3-1?
I think it's actually split.
Is it split? Okay. All right. I feel better. I was going to be like very surprised if it was 3-1. I really do believe the Wii is one of Nintendo's best consoles of all time. They've always been known for their ingenuity, their thinking outside the bun mentality. So they've got the Wiimotes with this one, which is, I think, the first console to have like motion sensor point cordless remotes, and probably the first controllers to cause household and bodily damage as a result.
And to have condoms.
And I think the Wii incorporated a larger demographic than we've ever seen in video games. My 13-year-old nephew has my old Wii, and still I'll go over there and be like, do you want to play Wii bowling? And I'm like, yeah, let's play some fucking Wii bowling. And my mom will play it, and she's like pushing 70. And the Wii has always had this sort of familial vibe to it where anyone can sort of jump in. And honestly, my favorite part about the Wii is New Super Mario Brothers Wii, which was the first couch co-op Mario Brothers game, which I would have fucking killed for as a kid. And so when that finally came out in the mid to late 2000s, I played it with friends and family, and it was the experience that I'd always been looking for with the original Mario games. And it also had Mario Kart Wii, which had the steering wheel too. And both of these games, I think, kind of brought in that era of like the playful couch co-op hatred. Like you have your best friends that you play with, but you're calling them just like obscene things the entire time. And then you get done and you're like still best friends. So I don't know what other console can really do that for you.
Great points, and I do that with my niece and nephew still to this day on Mario Kart on the Switch. I was wrong. Actually, it's 3-1 for the Wii, Andrea. So the Wii has the edge here. But Jim, is it going to be the Wii or the NES?
Well, it's a really tough argument. I think you both made great arguments for that. But I also agree with the community aspect and the motion controls. I thought were like really cool personally. Being able to play first-person shooters with the motion control was a thing I liked. You had the Zapper Gun for NES, which was only a few games, right? So I think that's the Wii is still my vote, even though you made a really good argument, and it would be great if these two were the last two to go against each other as well.
Could totally be a final two. I hear that. David, is it Wii or is it NES for you?
So I'm going to flip to your side, Eric, and I think your argument is I get the point about expanding in games and making it more accessible, more inclusive, 100%. But I think the argument is so strong that without Nintendo and the NES, we wouldn't have a rebound from the video game crash. The other thing I would just add is I remember during the time of the Wii just being kind of a frustrated Nintendo fan, seeing kind of like years go by without some serious announcements on the software front, and feeling like in the play to appeal to all audiences, sometimes the casual experiences felt like they kind of won over the more like Nintendo franchises we had come to know and love. And I could only imagine having an NES, even though I didn't, but I can imagine having all those new franchises at your fingertips for the very first time, how exciting that must have been.
Well, here's the good news or bad news, is that it's split now with David switching over to the NES, and the Wii is the 1 seed here. So the Wii will advance into the next round. I think that we've done a great job talking about how the NES was critical. It was important. We have been guilty on this podcast in the past, Pixar episode, of the primacy argument winning over everything else to the point where it's almost absurd. So Wii moving forward here makes sense to me in terms of the broader picture. So Wii continues in the Final Four. Next, it's a clash of the second generations, as 2 seed Super Nintendo currently has the edge over 1 seed PlayStation 2. David, give us a postscript on why PS2 is the better sequel console. Jim, pixel it. Tell us why the Super Nintendo was so, well, super. David, please go first.
Yeah, so the PlayStation 2, where do we start here? This is my personal greatest of all time, released in 2000. It is the best-selling console of all time with 160 million units sold, and I find it so funny that Sony, the pettiness for Sony, a couple months ago when Nintendo was like, oh, the Switch has sold XYZ million, big milestone for the Switch, Sony had to, like Michael Jordan coming out of retirement, say, actually, the PS2 sold 160, so they firmly put it probably going to maintain that milestone unless the Switch has some kind of crazy run up this year before the Switch 2. But so why was the PS2 so popular? I know we touched on some of it, but the backwards compatibility with the PS1, the fact that it doubled as a DVD player at the time, the price point retailing at $299 at launch, which made it competitive with the Xbox, but then getting its price cut a couple years later to $199, which brought it in line with the GameCube. And then, most importantly, which I'll always come back to, is just the game factor on the PlayStation 2. So we had Grand Theft Auto, Devil May Cry, God of War, Prince of Persia, Final Fantasy, 2 of my favorite games, Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy XII. We had Kingdom Hearts, the birth of Kingdom Hearts. We had Jak and Daxter, Silent Hill 2, Dark Cloud, Sly Cooper. I could go on, right? There's so many, and that's the fun thing about the PS2 is everyone has their own stories of the games that they loved. I'm a big role-playing person, and obviously that's like heaven for a role-playing fan is the PlayStation 2. But if you're an action fan, if you're a platformer fan, there were so many great experiences on the PlayStation 2, and I love the Super Nintendo as well. But there's no other console that I have so many games in my personal backlog than those PlayStation 2 games that are gathering dust. And someday I'll get back to it. But yeah, all-time great.
Huge props for having the taste to admit your love of Final Fantasy 12. So I appreciate that. Jim, talk to us about the Super Nintendo.
Well, it's Nintendo, but Super, right?
Yeah.
Super Mario World, the Super Metroid, the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. You have it's a nice upgrade, a big upgrade for its time, a Super FX chip. It really kind of had a significant role in shaping the gaming landscape in its time. It was fun. I think it continued that aspect of Nintendo having that fun kind of starting what maybe we'll talk more about with the Wii, of that kind of family friendly aspect where the PlayStation 2 was more gamer, and so I think that maybe is the difference here between the two. That being said, I kind of think, David, you made a better argument. I might flip my own vote.
That it happens. We love that. We love compelling arguments. Andrea, where are you?
Also might leave.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I mean, also we might only have Nintendo left on the Final Four if we.
Sure. Something to
I'd like
consider.
to have some representation.
Agreed. Andrea, where are you on this one? Is it PS2 or Super Nintendo?
I was originally with Super Nintendo, but David, you did sway me back over to the PlayStation. It is just such, to quote Eric, a juggernaut of an item. And then you mentioned Kingdom Hearts, and that was it. It was nail in the coffin for me.
Yeah. I actually think I'm going to make it a clean sweep. I think I initially voted for Super Nintendo too. But I do think that if you're talking about innovation between generations, the PS2 compared to the PS1 was major. And the Super Nintendo was super cool in like 1991. But when you actually look at it, it had a very short lifespan, by the way. I think it was something like 5 years between the SNES and then N64. And yes, there are huge games that came out of it. The original Mario Kart, Justice for Mario Paint, so many Donkey Kong Country, right? F-Zero. But the PS2 really was a quantum leap for gaming. And it was, I think, the definitive system for that particular area of the console war. So I'm going to do a clean sweep, and we will be moving PS2 into the Final Four. Finally, in round 2, let's get ready to rumble pack, as one seed Nintendo 64 seems poised to make it to the Final Four, but Andrea wants us to segue to 3 seed Sega Genesis. David, tell us why you have your golden eye on N64. Andrea, go supersonic and rush to victory for Genesis. Andrea, please go first.
Because I had both of these consoles growing up. The Genesis was always my personal preferred console, just in my own home life. Then the N64, I was able to play with my sister, who was not like a gamer. So we played like a lot of like Mario Tennis and stuff like that. But then the Sega Genesis, I was able to play a lot of those first-person games. What some gamers might call like real games, quote unquote. It was the first 16-bit console out there. We saw the introduction of Sonic the Hedgehog, which was supposed to be Sega's rival to Mario. You could buy an accessory to have it read floppy disks. It was the first console to have a startup splash screen, which I think is really interesting. And I think the Sega Genesis like really taught me lessons in patience and persistence with games like The Lion King and Echo the Dolphin. But it really just had, for me, it was that like gateway into games when we're talking about like more current day consoles like Xbox and PlayStation and the Switch. I think for me, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is I liked the game selection better on Sega, just as a personal preference. But I understand the love for N64.
All right. David, talk to us about the N64. We really haven't talked about it much at all.
Yeah, the N64 is an interesting one. So this came out in 1996. And I think one of the things that was striking to me when I was doing my research was checking, again, the sales numbers on this one was 32.9 million, which actually means that it sold worse than the NES and it sold worse than the SNES. Now I have maybe some thoughts as to why that might be. I believe the N64 was the first time that we saw a three-way console race between Nintendo, Sony, and am
Sega
I blanking?
At the time?
I'm trying. Actually, my timeline might be off a bit. Yeah, because this would have predated the Xbox, but this is when right when PlayStation 1 was entering the forefront, and so maybe there was more competition at the time. But nonetheless, this was kind of an interesting battle because it was kind of Sony kicking things off, and there's some history between Sony trying to partner with other game makers before. If I just want a quick shout out the book Console Wars, where it delves into this in great detail, and it's a thrilling read. But basically, Sony decided to create its own console after getting kind of boxed out by partnerships with Nintendo and Sega, but the N64 was kind of Nintendo, I could argue, at the height of its powers, because this is when a lot of the well-known Nintendo franchises that have become legendary, we first got to see in a 3D space. So obviously you can't talk about the N64 without talking about Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask. Also, just the back-to-back of those two Zelda games alone in like a 2-year stretch, I believe, is crazy. Super Mario 64, which you can make the argument is one of the greatest games of all time. You have Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. Mario Kart 64, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark. This was Rare also at the height of its powers before it kind of became a shell of itself and all the talent left the studio and went to Microsoft. But it's not necessarily the most... it doesn't have the same diversity of games as, say, the PlayStation 2, but I would argue it has the most iconic lineup. It certainly brings the hits.
All right. Jim, is it going to be N64 or is it going to be the Sega Genesis?
N64, 3D Space, GoldenEye, Mario Kart. Those were, I think, great great pieces of it.
For me, I distinctly remember walking into Toys R Us when the N64 first came out and watching Mario 64 being played. I wasn't even playing it. I was watching other people being played it and thinking, I can't believe this is real. I cannot believe what I am watching. It was mind-blowing the same way that the Wii blew my mind in terms of, like, how is this happening on the screen right now? For that alone, I have to give it to N64 over Genesis, but you did a great job talking about Genesis's many fine qualities, Andrea. So we will be moving the N64 into the Final Four, and that is it. We are going to take a quick break to untangle these power cords. What does this even go to? We'll be right back.
Craving some seriously passionate pop culture debates? Need your fix of hot takes and hilarious arguments? Then you absolutely have to check out the Great Pop Culture Debate on YouTube. We're talking everything from superhero showdowns to the most controversial cartoon theme songs. No pop culture stone is left unturned. Our YouTube channel includes content not found anywhere else, including series-specific reviews, fantasy casting, and more. Find us on YouTube, The Great Pop Culture Debate, because some debates, well, they just need to be settled.
And we're back with the final four of our best video game console debate. At this point in the show, I always like to take a step back to see if it shook out the way I expected it to. We actually have 4 1-seeds that made it to the final four. That actually does not happen very often on this show. I think that speaks to the correct consoles making it to the top of the poll and getting to the bracket that way. It is mostly Nintendo. It's Nintendo Switch versus Nintendo Wii, PS2 versus N64, but I feel like you'd be hard-pressed to make... maybe the NES could have fit in here, but I don't know. Maybe the N64 would be the one I would knock off of here, but it would be tough. I do want to start at the top. I'd like to go with the back of the pack first. Jim, between the Nintendo Switch and the Nintendo Wii, which one advances here?
I think it's the Switch. It takes all the innovation of the Wii, but it also combines the handheld aspect of the innovation that happened in Nintendo and puts them all together to a versatile console.
Yeah, I mean, one of the downsides of the Wii to me is that whenever you would take it to somebody else's house, you'd have to set it up with the sensor bar, and it was very clumsy in that perspective. And you can take your Nintendo Switch anywhere, and boop-de-boo, in like 5 minutes, you're playing 8-player Smash, and everybody is locked in and having a great-ass time. David Silbert, is it going to be the Switch or the Nintendo Wii for you?
Yeah, I have to echo what Jim said. I think also just from a games, because I know I keep coming at it from the games angle, but this is the first time, at least from what I can see, that Nintendo kind of approached the handheld space and the console space at the same time. So one year you might be getting the big, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom kind of game, and then the other year you're getting Echoes of Wisdom. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds in one package, and you can play it at home and play it on the go. It just feels like this is like where gaming was meant to go. So Nintendo Switch for me.
Andrea, is it going to be Switch or Nintendo Wii for you?
I truly believe the Switch is the best video game console of all time. I have it going all the way. I think when you can get the same gaming experience going from handheld to the TV just by bloop dropping it in a deck, that is insane technology to me, truly. Like, if you think about just the progression of how far we've come with consoles, I've got to go with the Switch.
Yeah, and I will also say that in terms of the iterations of the franchises that we've come to expect from Nintendo, I think it's pretty hard to argue that the ones that appeared on the Switch, if they're not the very best of those entries, they're in the top 3 for pretty much all of them. Smash Ultimate is pretty amazing. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is admittedly ported from the Wii U, but kind of found its full footing on the Switch, is spectacular. Breath of the Wild completely revolutionized Zelda. It's weird that we only had Mario Odyssey and only one Mario Odyssey, because that was also a great game for Mario. So many amazing entries for this system. I do give it to the Switch. The Wii kind of democratized gaming for everybody, and the Switch continued that trend and made it even better. We didn't even talk about the sales. I believe it is now the best-selling Nintendo system. Am I right about that? No? Wii is still better selling?
No,
I think the DS
Nintendo
has it.
DS has it. Yep.
Yeah.
Not by much, though.
Yeah, by 5 million, 4 million.
Yep, 4 million.
Easy peasy. All right, great. So we're going to move Nintendo Switch into the final 2. PS2 versus N64. I'd like to start with Andrea. Where are you coming on this one?
I could really go either way on this one. I was not a PlayStation kid, so this one is a little bit tough for me. So personally, just bias, I'm going to go with the N64. I, as a kid, I always associated PlayStation with like my rich friends, and my N64 was for me and all my poor friends and family. So class solidarity going with the N64.
Love that. David, is it going to be PS2 or N64?
So I'm going to go with the PS2, and I know I gave the arguments for both of these. I think when it comes down to it for me, the 64 is more top-heavy. I think if we're just going to individual games, I think that the 64 has better...
Yeah, you put the game in on the top, right?
Yeah, the PS2, you got to open it up. No, but I think PS2 just has such a depth of the catalog, and it has quality, but the depth of the catalog is just astounding, even by today's standards, so I have to stick with the PS2.
Jim, what about you?
I'm gonna agree with David again. I think that catalog is so the fact that it has all the PlayStation 1 as well. It makes it such a impressive, and it also was just like it was. Andrea, I agree with you. Like I was more Nintendo, but like I knew that was like the gamer system, right? And so I think that's a good time to celebrate that.
Yeah, we had never had any non-Nintendo systems until the PS2, and I agree with everything that's being said about it. For all of the graphical leaps that the N64 made, and for all the innovation that was in those games, the PS2 did that, but also had an unbelievable catalog that has never been paralleled. The closest I think can come to is the original NES in terms of the number of games and the number of like incredible games. But that's 3 for the PS2, so we'll move it into the final 2. It is Nintendo Switch versus PS2. I'm going to start in the middle with David Silbert. Where are you going?
So it's interesting. I think I came into this episode, this bracket, anticipating sticking with my first love, or not my first love, but the PS2. I actually think I'm going to lean Nintendo Switch here, and I think we've talked about a lot of the reasons why. It's just the perfect balance between inclusion, accessibility, form factor. It's ergonomic. I'm a big Steam Deck person, but I'd be lying if I said that thing was comfortable to hold. And I think the Nintendo Switch just nailed it in the fact that it's the 3rd best-selling console of all time, with a couple months left to go, or several. I mean, it'll keep selling, I'm sure, even once the Switch 2 is out. And the fact that Nintendo's doubling down with the Switch 2, I think, is proof that they had something special. It was like lightning in a bottle with this console.
Great. Jim, is it going to be Nintendo Switch or PS2 for you?
I worry that the Switch 2 will result like Eric complained about the Wii U, that it's just going to be a one-up, like, oh, it's a little bit bigger and stronger. But I also agree that the Switch it's that if we're talking about gaming and gaming consoles, this whole time we've talked about like there's the handhelds, there's the consoles that you sit down, and this is just all of gaming included. So the Switch for me is where I think is number 1.
It took the peanut butter and the jelly and it put it together. Exactly. Andrea, where are you on this one? Is it going to be Nintendo Switch or PS2?
It's going to be the PS. No, it's the Nintendo Switch for me all the way. I have games that I've purchased and played on Steam that I have hundreds of hours in that I have repurchased for my Switch because I can get the same gaming experience from my couch. Or like on the road or on an airplane or something. And that it is still just like mind-blowing technology to me. So Nintendo Switch all the way.
Yeah, I'm going to give it to the Switch as well. I just think it is the summation of literally decades of Nintendo's, like, they started the handheld, right? They in the 80s, and they had the most success with that through like the 2000s, and then they were like, let's stop dividing our interests and focus fire on one system for everybody and just do the best possible game experience for everything for that system, and they did it. And it also has, like we mentioned, there are 8-player games with the Switch that work really well. You can do the online co-op play, and it works seamlessly for the most part. Yeah, it's graphically not as strong as the other systems in this particular generation. I mean, the Mortal Kombat 11, was that what it was? The Switch port of Mortal Kombat 11 was hysterical, how bad it was. But that's not what the point of that machine was. And maybe the Switch 2 will be better in that regard, but the Switch for being what it was trying to do, just excelled in every way, and I think it's a fine winner for that. So there you have it. Our pick for the best video game console is the Nintendo Switch. Do you agree? Do you think we should reset this entire debate? Tell us how you really feel by leaving a comment on this episode at greatpopculturedebate.com, or find us on Blue Sky or Mastodon. While you're there, make sure you subscribe and follow the podcast so you can hear about what new debates are coming soon, vote in open polls, and even decide which topics we tackle next. I want to say thank you to my panel. You each get a Platinum Achievement Trophy for this, and thank you for listening. If you loved what you heard, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get even more exclusive content and you get episodes a whole day early. We hope you have a good one, and remember, everyone is entitled to their wrong opinion. Now let's go read the new issue of Nintendo Power.